When I first started my journey to better understand women and their way of thinking, I often heard a phrase repeated: ignore her and she will come after you. It was everywhere. I heard it in videos, I read it in forums, I heard it in conversations with friends. It almost seemed like a magic formula, a foolproof strategy that guaranteed success with women. So I decided to try it, convinced that all I had to do was distance myself a little, act disinterested, respond to messages late, and stop constantly seeking her attention for her to suddenly realize my value and start chasing me. But the reality was very different. Not only did this technique not work, but it often led to the exact opposite. Instead of chasing me, many girls simply walked away completely, losing all interest. At that point I started to think that it was just one of those cliches, one of those bar tips that actually had no basis in real life. Yet, with time and experience, I realized that the problem was not the phrase itself, but the way I interpreted it. I discovered that behind that apparent simplicity there was a much deeper concept related to female psychology. It was not a superficial trick or a strategy to manipulate a woman, but something that has its roots in the unconscious mechanisms of attraction. The real mistake was not in the phrase, but in my way of putting it into practice. I had not understood what it really meant and, consequently, I applied it incorrectly. By the end of this video, you will have a clearer understanding of female psychology and you will understand how to dose your attention in the right way to create attraction naturally, without forcing and without useless power games. This is one of the most important topics of the entire series on how to improve interpersonal dynamics, so pay attention, because what I am about to explain to you could completely overturn your approach to relationships. There is an attitude that unknowingly pushes many women away and that is unfortunately very common among men, even among those who think they are behaving in the right way. It is the excessive need for validation, that constant need for attention and approval that manifests itself in the way you speak, the way you act and the way you relate to a woman. You may think that you are not a needy person, yet this attitude is subtle and often goes unnoticed, because it is not only about obvious behaviors such as obsessively checking your phone for a text, calling dozens of times a day or becoming excessively jealous when she spends time with someone else. The need for validation manifests itself in the smallest and most subtle details, in the way you constantly try to please her, in the fact that you put her on a pedestal and act as if her attention is the greatest prize of your life. That's why it's so important to understand the concept of relationship dynamics. When I talk about dynamics, I'm not just talking about established relationships, but about every stage of a relationship with a woman, whether it's the first meeting, courtship, or a long-term relationship. The key is to understand how much investment you're putting into the relationship versus what you're getting in return. That doesn't mean you shouldn't give anything, but how you balance your attention is crucial. If you're the one constantly chasing, if you're always the one texting first, if you're always the one making the effort to meet up and keep the relationship alive, while she remains passive and doesn't invest in the same way, her interest will inevitably wane. We live in a society that has taught us that to win a woman over you have to shower her with attention, be available all the time, give her gifts, text her every morning and every night, take her to expensive restaurants and continually show her how special she is. We are told that if we can be kinder, more generous and more present than all the other men, then she will realize how much we are worth and will choose us. But this vision ignores a fundamental aspect. Attraction is not a question of logic or the amount of attention received. It is not based on the simple sum of nice gestures. Being overly attentive may make you seem like a great friend, but it will rarely spark real attraction. At worst, it may even make her lose interest in you because it sends the message that you are too available, that you have no other options, that you will do anything to win her over. The irony is that people who are desperate for attention often end up with the opposite effect: they are ignored. On the other hand, people who demonstrate emotional independence and do not need approval are perceived as more attractive and desirable. But why does this happen? Why is emotional independence so attractive? Why is a confident person who isn't overly concerned with pleasing others so magnetic? In the next episodes of this series, we'll also explore the evolutionary reasons for this dynamic, but for now I want you to reflect on a fundamental concept: indirect communication. Every behavior conveys a message. It's not just about what you do, but what your attitude communicates on a deep level. If you buy a drink to a woman you barely know or try to impress her by telling her about your successes at work, you may unwittingly convey a sense of insecurity. It's as if you feel deep down that you're not enough and try to compensate through material gestures or self-congratulatory speeches. On the contrary, a man who jokes lightly, who interacts without worrying too much about making an impression, who doesn't need to prove anything, sends a completely different message. His attitude says, "I'm sure of myself, I like myself for who I am and I don't need to win you over by proving something." This type of energy is extremely attractive, because it communicates value without needing to flaunt it. The point is that it is not only the behavior itself that makes the difference, but the meaning that it carries with it. And this is the key concept to understand. You do not have to change what you do just to get a result, but you have to change the way you perceive yourself, your attitude and your mindset. Attraction is not based on forced strategies, but on your authenticity and the value that you naturally transmit when you are truly confident in yourself. The behavior of a man who is needy is not always immediately obvious. The real issue is what the behavior conveys. When a man acts too available or tries to impress a woman, what he is communicating is that he is too emotionally invested. In other words, he is showing that he has no other options and that he feels, on a subconscious or even conscious level, inadequate compared to her. This leads him to try to compensate for this feeling of insufficiency through gestures such as buying a woman he doesn't know a drink, offering her rides, taking her to fancy dinners, bragging about his high-paying job, and so on. These behaviors are not necessarily needy in the traditional sense, but they come from a place of insecurity and a sense of inadequacy, and that makes them extremely unattractive. Now we come to a second level of neediness. A man who is not completely needy, but still shows signs of emotional neediness. This type of man is not as desperate as the first level, but if a woman stimulates him in the right way, he can become defensive and insecure. If a woman says to him, for example, "You look like a playboy," he may react immediately, denying and justifying himself, responding excessively and unnecessarily, just like a man who is desperately trying to prove something to himself and others. This behavior is another clear sign of neediness, although less obvious than the previous case. At the third level, we find the man who shows no neediness, and this is exactly the type of man that women find truly attractive. A man who has nothing to prove. If a woman accuses him of being a playboy, he reacts with a sly smile and replies that she seems to have an eye for talent. This type of man is aware of his own value and does not need to seek validation from anyone. If he wants, he can even test women to see if they are up to him, and he does this in a playful way, with phrases like, "Nothing beats a good massage," if she is trying to seduce him. This man knows that the value he conveys does not need to be proven, and his self-esteem shines through in every action he takes. Now, it is essential to understand that the term ignore is closely linked to the concept of neediness. When you ignore a woman, you are actually communicating that you are not needy. But be careful, I am not saying to ignore women mechanically, as advice often found on the internet suggests. What I want to convey to you is a deeper concept. You need to develop yourself, work on your mindset and truly understand what it means to not be needy. Only then will you be able to attract a woman without forcing it. The key is that your actions come from an inner awareness, from an authenticity that does not need to be demonstrated through tricks or manipulative behavior. It is not about following the usual recipe to impress, but about changing your attitude towards yourself and towards others. This doesn't mean you should stop being nice or available, but it does mean that you need to learn to set healthy boundaries, to not invest too much emotionally in a woman too soon, without there being any reciprocation. You don't have to be the perfect boyfriend right away, take her out, buy her expensive gifts or be her shoulder to cry on, if there hasn't been any real emotional investment on her part. Investing too soon, without her having done the same, is a sign that something is wrong. You should always avoid appearing too available, because women, even if unconsciously, are very good at sniffing out these signals and, when they sense neediness, their attraction to you can quickly fade. So, I hope you now have a clearer understanding of what neediness is and how it works in the dynamic between men and women. If you are watching this video, you probably have some needy traits to some extent. There is nothing wrong with that, but it is crucial that you recognize it and work on changing it, because being needy is one of the most repulsive aspects of a woman, no matter how attractive you are. The main concepts you should keep in mind are these. First of all, neediness is the most inappropriate trait a man can have. Secondly, neediness doesn't just manifest itself in the most obvious behaviors like obsessively checking your phone or calling non-stop. It can also emerge in more subtle gestures, like doing unsolicited favors or feeling obligated to constantly justify yourself. Finally, the inverse of this behavior is that the less you give, the more you get. Women are instinctively attracted to men who are confident, who aren't needy, and who have nothing to prove. If you change your mindset from, "I hope she likes me," to, "Let's see if she's good enough for me," you'll find that the game of seduction turns on its head. If you try to impress her too much, she'll be less interested. But if you let her try to impress you, the attraction will grow naturally. In this journey towards awareness of relational dynamics, I invite you to reflect on how ready you are to change your approach, developing a stronger mindset and behavior that exudes confidence. In the next video we will delve even deeper into these concepts, so don't miss the next episodes.